My name is Emily Harper, and I am a 34-year-old woman living in Maple Ridge, Oregon, a little town where you can never escape the smell of fir trees and the mountain mist or the gossipy whispers of neighbors. I had always loved my cozy blue-gray house on the corner, with its flaking wooden porch and giant backyard sloping down to the creek. It was the first home I bought by myself after years of scrimping and renting tiny apartments in the city, and I took care of it like a favorite book, reading every crack in the paint, learning how the furnace groaned in the cold, and coaxing a few wild daisies up from the weedy backyard. I was not the best gardener, but my unruly yard felt like a small rebellion in a world obsessed with neatness. That was until the Homeowners Association decided my world needed more green coverage. That was their phrase. Covers at least 70% of exposed soil with green ground cover as per community regulations. I did not even know such a rule existed, but our new HOA president, Margaret Withers, seemed ready to enforce it with the force of a hurricane. Margaret was the sort of person who wore pastel sweaters draped over her shoulders and stopped by with a clipboard, her voice syrupy sweet and cold at the same time. She would smile and say, "Emily, dear, we all strive for a uniform beauty here in Maple Ridge Plaza." I hated how she looked at my little hill of wildflowers as if I had planted a nest of rats on purpose. When Margaret handed me the official notice, there was no warmth in her smile. "More green coverage, Emily. You are in violation. You have 2 months to comply." I tried to argue, to point out that my wildflowers were technically green, and that other lots on the edge of the development had plenty of gravel or mulch, but it was useless. Margaret shrugged and told me, "We cannot make exceptions. Imagine if everyone did as they pleased." The next 2 weeks I tried to fix it. I went out and tried to seed my patchy lawn, but it was the wrong season and the only things that sprouted were mud and disappointment. Every time I left for work, I felt Margaret's eyes burning into my back, like she was waiting for me to fail. She started sending more notices. "Insufficient green coverage persists as of inspection date. Final warning." Suddenly, she was showing up with board members measuring yardage and counting square feet like they were scientists discovering a new planet. I felt angry, powerless, and exposed in my own yard. I was the talk of the neighborhood, pitied and judged by people who, last summer, had borrowed my ladder or drank my lemonade on the porch. Some offered advice about clover seed or how to appease the HOA. Others avoided me. No matter what I did, it seemed I was falling further behind, and now my home felt like a punishment, not a sanctuary. But one night, after a fruitless search for more seed that would somehow sprout overnight, I sat at my kitchen table drinking cold coffee, and something inside me snapped. If they wanted green coverage, I would give them green coverage. I stayed up late researching the definition of green ground cover and learned quickly that the guidelines were vague. Nowhere did it specify a plant type. It all had to be living, and it all had to be green. That was it. When dawn broke, I started calling every local nursery and landscape supplier in 20 miles. With a little luck and a stack of credit cards, I managed to source hundreds of flats of the fastest spreading ground cover I could find: Dicundra, creeping jenny, sweet woodruff, and the kicker English ivy. It was technically legal, dangerously invasive, and nearly impossible to stop once started. I worked all weekend, tilling up every hint of open dirt. I planted so densely that the ground was more leaf than earth. I sprinkled in some wild moss and even bought rolls of live grass sod for good measure. By the end, not 1 inch of brown soil was visible. My neighbors stared and whispered. Margaret herself walked by twice, eyes narrowed, nose twitching. She hated that it was all green and clearly regretted what she had asked for, but she was trapped by her own rule. At the next HOA meeting, Margaret tried to sound proud. "Congratulations, Emily, you are now in full compliance." I smiled the fakest smile I could manage and replied, "Thank you so much for your guidance, Margaret. I do hope the green stays. Some of these species spread quickly and they are awfully hard to remove." I could see her jaw clench. It did not take long. The creeping jenny spilled over to the common sidewalk, the dichondra started swallowing the curb, and the ivy crept silently under the fence lining Margaret's precious rose garden. It looked lovely at first, and people complimented me on my lush new yard. 3 weeks later, the entire block was fighting off the invasion. Margaret complained at every meeting, but my green ground cover was still exactly what the notice required. By fall, the HOA called an emergency session to rewrite the regulations to list specific plant species, with the exclusion of all invasive species. They even paid a service to dig up my entire yard. But by then, the damage was done. The roots had reached 3 yards over. To Margaret's horror, she had to tear out half her rose bushes to stop the ivy invasion. The next spring, when everyone's lawns were suffering, mine was still green. It was stubborn, wild, and a little out of control, just like me. I planted more wildflowers at the edges, and nobody dared say a word about them. Margaret stepped down as president that year. She still smiles at me, but it is colder than ever, like she is afraid I might grow something even stranger next. In the end, my yard belongs to me and so does my home. I learned that sometimes the best revenge is giving people exactly what they ask for, and more than they ever wanted. And whenever I see a green shoot poking up at the edge of Margaret's fence, I have to smile. Sometimes the wild things win.